Hey guys, it's Brian with J&P Cycles, and this is part one of how to build a cafe racer. Now we're not just going to take a bunch of expensive parts and throw them at this bike and call it a day. I want to show you how to do this on a budget. Behind me I have an 03 Sportster that we paid right around $3,500 for. With a couple more grand, we can have a killer cafe racer for around $6,000 to $7,000 in total. Now the term cafe racer, this comes from the 60s. Guys would strip down their bikes, lower their handlebars, add performance parts to them, all in the effort to beat their peers racing from cafe to cafe. Now we've already shown you how to build a street tractor. If you're interested in that design, check out in the description below where we'll show you how to get that done. Our first step in this build is we're going to touch the front end. We really want to lower these handlebars and give it an overall kind of low and mean and minimalist design. So we're going to take away any parts that we don't need, we'll lower the bars, lower the gauges, and give us a better modern looking headlight. Let's get started on that front. All right, before we get started, let's protect our tank because we're going to be moving around quite a bit, removing all of our controls and our handlebar. We're going to want to cover something. We're going to want to take something to cover our tank with, and I don't really have a nice mat, so I'm going to use a quilted liner from a jacket. It's not going to scratch the paint, and it's padded enough to where if anything falls on it, we're not going to scratch anything. Let's remove the controls and then work our way down to the handlebars. Now I am going to save a lot of these parts because I'm going to reuse most of the control unit. Eventually we'll replace the grips and the mirrors, but we're going to do that after we get our new bars on. Now with our stock handlebars off, I'm going to continue and I want to remove this this eyebrow here and this headlight. So it'll be easier to get to everything with these bars off. So we're going to continue and then kind of work our way backwards as we rebuild this with our new parts. Now the reason why I'm undoing kind of this mount, this kind of eyebrow thing, is because I'm going to put a new Roland Sands gauge bracket here. And what it's going to do is going to take that gauge from being more vertical to flat, really kind of keeping that low presence to the front end of this bike. Now that we have the gauge cluster and headlight bracket removed, I want to remove this gauge altogether. The new Roland Sands one is actually going to involve us splicing the wires, and then we're going to get rid of this entire mount altogether. So I just need to remove this. Once you remove your speedo gauge, I went ahead and marked each of these indicators here, like turn signals, neutral light, oil light. The reason being is we're going to cut these, and right now they're not very clearly marked. So all I did is just run a little bead of tape, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's how I marked them off. So I'm going to cut across here, and we're going to splice those together with our new Roland Sands one. It's really important to mark them because once I cut them, I have no idea which wires these go to, so I'm going to use this as a visual reference. All right, once you got all these wires cut, I'm going to peel back some of this heat shrink and then match the wires up to the correct ones based off the provided wiring diagram. All right, once you've rewired your speedo wires, now we can take the actual unit itself out of the stock housing, set the housing aside, and we're gonna need to mount it in our new Roland Sands backing here. So really just set it in, and then we're gonna thread from behind to tighten up. All right, the next step to complete this is we need to put this, this back plate that also holds your headlight back on. So I'm gonna leave this hand tight for now, just because I wanna show you that this is how you adjust for the headlight angle of this. So depending on where you tighten it down will be the headlight angle. Really, to finalize this whole install is we're gonna just re-bolt the speedo onto the back plate here, and then we're done. Now to mount this, it's gonna be 2 bolts that go back to the top triple. But really I want to show you why this is a good kind of stopping point, especially if you're doing this with handlebars. Now before we finish our headlight install, I want to take this time to kind of show you why everything's pretty clean here. If you need to change your handlebars or if you want to put clip-ons, now is really the time to do it. So with these 2 bolts here, these are going to be your risers. So if you want to replace those with something a little bit more streamlined or taller or shorter, this would be the time to do it because you have easy access. And really there's 2 options. So when I told you Cafe Racers, they like to kind of be low and mean. So if we're going to do a handlebar, I would suggest getting some type of lower no rise handlebar that's still going to be sporty and aggressive. If you want to take it the next step further, the clip-on option is definitely the way to go. So a clip-on, you're going to need to remove the top triple tree and simply slide this down the fork tube. Now this bike will be more of a daily rider, so we are going to throw on some handlebars. So I'm going to change these risers here just to get something a little bit more minimalist looking, and then throw these bars on. With our handlebars secure, now we can go back to throwing on our speedometer and headlight mount and mounting it to the triple tree. All right, once you have your headlight bracket and gauge cluster installed, I'm gonna go in now and we're gonna change the bulb on this headlight. We're gonna use a Cyron LED. Now that the headlight's done, let's move on to putting on the hand controls. Now go ahead and tighten up the rest of this gauge cluster to where you'll see that this kind of sits kind of low and flush and your headlight's not going to move. Once this is secure, you're ready to move on. So we already kind of put the handlebars in place loosely so we can kind of mount everything and move everything around. But feel free to go ahead and adjust your handlebars and tighten them because now we're going to throw on the controls. So with the controls here, and on these Biltwell bars, these are pretty narrow. So we're gonna have to loosely mount the controls first, see where our cables and wires hang, and then once we figure out how to route everything, tighten it up. I already kind of know looking at this that I need to reroute some things. So I kind of just map some things out with the clutch cable and the throttle cables, and I wanna make this look as clean as possible. But once we get everything put on, I'm going to kind of route things again and then zip tie them out of the way. Now the reason why we kind of want to mock everything up first, especially when we're running any type of lines or cables, it's important. So one thing that I just kind of ran across is the stock front brake line. Now I already removed it because I want to show you what it looks like. Now they have these hard metal lines here that really don't bend or flex. So when we're changing from handlebars that were really those big tall kind of 8 buckhorns that were on this thing down to these low bars, there's a lot of extra line of this brake line available and it doesn't bend. So it's really not going to work with this new bar setup. Luckily, we got some Russell stainless steel brake lines that I ordered in that are really going to clean up the look and also give us a better feel. So when you get stainless steel lines like this, you're going to get a lot better feel out of that front lever and you're going to get a lot more power to that front brake without pulling so hard. So we're going to throw these on. These are going to be a lot more pliable and allow us the movement that's needed to mount these controls onto these new bars. All right, now that we got our new brake lines on, I'm gonna start throwing back our throttle housing assembly. I am gonna end up changing grips, but I'm gonna throw the throttle tube on now before I change grips, just because it'll be easier when that thing's mounted on there to pull the old grip off and install the new. All right, once we get all of our controls secure, I'm not gonna tidy up the wiring yet because I'm about to add some more. So really the next step is we're gonna throw on a mirror and some type of turn signal. Now I have these Todd Cycle little shooter mirrors here, and I like that they're pretty small. They kind of match the headlight with that round shape, and they're gonna disappear. So there's 2 ways to do it. You can mount it on top, but we really wanna keep that profile low. So we're gonna mount it underneath, and I'm gonna put one on both sides. That way we're both DOT legal and we get some practicality out of it. But before I mount the mirror, I'm also going to do something about a turn signal here. So I have these drag specialty little LED lights, and they're really just going to disappear and kind of hang out right underneath here when I mount my mirror. Let's throw all these on. I'm going to wire these turn signals up, and then we'll test it out. So you can see we've already drastically changed the look of this new Cafe Racer by lowering the handlebars and changing the front end. So some of the parts that we did was we got rid of these old stock handlebars that were really just too big for the bike. We brought everything down low with some zero drag bars from Biltwell. We added some Vans grips for more control, and these are really nice, man. They're nice and sticky and they look good. And then we moved to the front with a new Cyron LED headlight, which really helps us with visibility. It's a pretty quick install. And then we put those Russell brake lines on. Now we did that out of necessity because of those old steel lines were just, they didn't move, they don't flex. So we needed a different line, and this will help give us a little bit more performance and feel. Then to kind of finish the look off, we put that Roland Sands new gauge cluster on, which kind of flattens that gauge cluster out to give it that sleek, streamlined look. All right, once you got the front knocked out, let's move on to the rear. Now you're really gonna see that Cafe start to come out. Now, in order to do this, we wanna change the seat and or tail section. So you can see on this bike, it's a hugger. So we got that solo seat and just that standard tail. And we really wanna lose that. We want more of an aggressive, kind of like that board style with the Cafe hump. And I'm gonna do that all in one shot with a Burly brand Cafe seat. Now they make these in 2 versions. This is the full like leather wrapped one. They do have one that also has a non-painted fiberglass tail, so if you could paint it to match. But the install is not too bad. We have to cut some things and install some brackets, but it's really going to kind of change the look of this bike totally. So once we put this on, you're definitely going to have that Cafe Racer look. The rest is just details. All right, to get started on this, we're going to need to remove the stock seat, the stock fender, and anything attached to the fender. All right, so now that we have everything removed, we're gonna need to cut and remove these struts here. Now, we are gonna cut them right behind where the shock mount is, so it's good to tape it off, get whatever type of grinder you have available, and make sure you wear PPE. So far up to this point, everything's been pretty plug and play, but this is what really makes these custom. Now, depending on your application, this whole part may be different, but this is gonna be how we're doing it today. Now, I have 3 different brands and different parts, and we have the seat with the seat bracket, and they have various brackets depending on which Sportster model you have. We need a tail light, and we also need a license plate frame or mount, and turn signals, because we wanna keep this thing DOT legal. So this is going to be kind of the fun part and the most troubling part too, because there's going to take some time figuring out where you want to put everything, how you want to mount it, and how you want it to look. So for us, I have that TC Bros stop light. Now this is kind of an old school style stop lamp that even has stop lit, illuminated up pretty bright right there. I'm going to mount this right underneath that seat mount there. So it's going to be really flush and kind of out of the way and almost look like it's floating under the seat. I also have some Drag Specialties LED bullet turn signals we're going to have. They're going to mount right next to that. So again, everything's going to be really close and streamlined. For the license plate bracket, I'm going to keep using that same seat bracket. I want to keep this thing as minimal as possible. I'm just going to drill a quick little hole through the license plate and mount it right through there. So we already got a lot of this pre-wired and out of the way, but we're going to show you how we take these wiring for most of these lamps and sync it into our stock wiring harness. All right, so we pulled the old wiring harness out of the back of the fender. Now this kind of clipped into the back of the stock taillight. And I pulled back, I cut the wires and I pulled back some of the shrink here just to expose some of that bare wire. So I'm testing this now to see which one's the brake and the stop switch. Now I did find out this taillight here is, the housing itself is the ground. So I don't need to run a ground anywhere else. I'm actually just gonna run a ground to one of these back bolts here and everything will work properly. After that, make sure I have everything tested right. I'm gonna solder these together and then shrink wrap them. All right, now that we've got our taillight mounted and tested, I'm I'm gonna repeat the process for our turn signals. You will need to figure out which side's the left and the right. I already figured it out and marked mine the left. So I'm just gonna wire these up and then we're gonna mount everything. All right, now that I got everything wired up and working properly and kind of placed right where I'm gonna mount it, everything's hard mounted except for the turn signals. Those are actually gonna go into the same bolt that I use the seat. Now it's time to kind of clean up this rat's nest of wiring I have. So electrical tape, or if you have shrink wrap to go around, just clean this up, remount any type of harnesses that you have moved, because our next step is we're gonna tighten everything up to finalize it and then put the seat on and then we're done. All right, now that we got the tail section all buttoned up, we need to move on to replacing our suspension, but we're not gonna throw the OEM stock shocks back on. Now these are a 12-inch shock, and as this is the Hugger Sportster, we're gonna upgrade them to some progressive. Now these progressives are 13-inch, they are adjustable, and it's really gonna up our ride quality and performance as well. It's a simple install with the 2 bolts, and progressive gives you all the spacers and collars that you need. So we've landed at our last part of part 1 of how to build your Cafe Racer, and this whole build so far has been about looking good and feeling good. And to tie that off, we're going to add some new foot pegs. Now I went with these Biltwell Mushman pegs for a couple reasons. Now this is a mid-control bike, and although a round peg would really look good, I don't think they really feel that well, and they might feel like they're kind of digging into the arch or ball of your foot. So these have a little bit more of a flat surface area. I think it's gonna look good and it's gonna definitely feel good. It's a simple install, it's just 2 bolts on each side, and we'll get it knocked out pretty quick. And that wraps up step 1 of how to build your Cafe Racer, where we focused on both looks and feel. Now we did this by lowering the stance and slimming the bike down. We added some zero drag bars from Biltwell, used that Roland Sands gauge cluster to bring it from a vertical to a horizontal flat look, and then we threw some LED lighting in the front to give it more of a modern feel. In the rear, we used the Burly brand Café tail and seat section, which came with all the hardware we needed to mount. Then we put on our custom hat and got fancy by adding a TC Brothers stoplight and some LED lighting for turn signals in the rear and a different license plate bracket. Progressive suspension is what we use to give us that plush and custom ride in the rear, and it's an easy install with any type of rear twin shock mounts. To finish our build, we added some Biltwell Mushman foot pegs to give us a lot more confidence and an aggressive look underneath our feet. If you'd like to see more gear reviews or product installs, make sure to follow us on social media or subscribe to us on YouTube, and together we'll help you find out what's next.